Beyond Reason Radio.
Hey, welcome to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio. Tom, should I start with some breaking news again? Lately, I've been starting with some of the breaking news of the day.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we're here for.
Okay. So here it is from FoxNews.com. Trump says his administration will not even consider renaming military bases named for Confederates. He said on Wednesday he came out strongly against the idea of renaming U.S. military bases that are named after Confederate generals, an issue that has come to the forefront amid the nationwide protests over police brutality and racial injustice. In a series of tweets on Wednesday afternoon, Trump called the bases named after Confederate soldiers hallowed grounds that helped train soldiers to win 2 world wars. He said his administration will not even consider renaming of these magnificent and fabled military installations. Now, what's really interesting about this is I actually saw a piece on this, I believe yesterday, that was written by General Petraeus, where he had the opposite opinion. I think that's what got a lot of attention for this. But he had the opposite opinion. He says it's time to rename these forts and these military installations.
You know what else is going to come up again?
What's that?
The changing the name of the Washington Redskins NFL team.
Oh, not with the Redskins thing again.
Yes, you bet. You wait.
Oh, man. So I just have to say I am not against changing the names, honestly. I'm not a big fan of the Confederacy. They were traitors to the country. They were traitors to the Constitution. They were defeated by one of my favorite presidents as Commander-in-Chief, Abraham Lincoln. Why are they named in our military installations? I actually don't understand why we named them after Confederate generals, because the Confederacy was our enemy. Why would the U.S. military installations be named after Confederate generals? So I actually totally support changing the name. Now, Trump, of course, is always going to fight the culture war. He feels like this is a fight against history, and he has to be on the side of preserving history. Now, I am against tearing down the Confederate statues because I believe that is tearing down history. And it might be an ugly part of our history, but it's still history. It's similar to, and I've said this before, but it's similar to Rome when you see a lot of the statues of some of the Roman emperors. Could you imagine tearing them down because they were dictators or they were evil or something? Of course not. It's still a part of the history. But when it comes to military installations, I think it's similar to what they did in South Carolina, where they had the Confederate flag over the state house and they decided to remove it. That makes sense because those are official government buildings or official government installations. And it doesn't make sense to me that the United States government, these official installations, would be named after our enemies. It just doesn't make sense to me.
A lot of these generals, though, went to West Point, where they got their training, believe it or not.
That's true.
And a lot of the generals of the North and South knew each other very well. And when the war ended, I wasn't there, but it seems to me that they were told to go home, become citizens again, and everything was to, quote, be forgotten.
Well, and that's one reason I love Abraham Lincoln, because when you read his second inaugural address, that's what he says, with malice towards none.
Yeah.
It's such an important speech, and it is so tragic to our history that he was assassinated. Imagine if he was not assassinated, what kind of contribution he could have kept having after that. So, I mean, to me, it's not really a hill worth dying on either way.
Right.
Honestly. I do like that you had to qualify that you weren't there.
Yes.
Just so people know I wasn't there. Okay. I was wondering. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. We are on until 8 p.m. tonight right here on News Radio WFLA Orlando. We're also on Facebook Live. You can like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page or like the WFLA Facebook page at WFLA Orlando. I have a lot to get to tonight. The voice you heard in the control room who was not there during the Civil War is Mr. Tom Benson. Once again, how are you, Tom?
I'm fine. My favorite Abraham Lincoln quote is, "Don't believe everything you read on the internet."
That is like your favorite meme of all time, isn't it? So before we get into the topic, I do have a special announcement that I have to get to.
Yes.
This Saturday, I will be moderating a Republican primary debate.
Wow, great.
Yes, I will be. It's at the Advanced Senior Center in Kissimmee. I am the moderator. It is the Republican primary debate for District 9. 4 different Republicans will debate. They're trying to get the Republican seat and go against Darren Soto, who is the Democrat who currently holds that seat in Congress right now. It's this Saturday, June 13th at 6 p.m. If you want to RSVP, you have to go to ChristopherWrightForCongress.com. He is the candidate who really put all of this together. So you can go there to RSVP. I am going to stream it live on Facebook. So I'll do it on my Facebook page.
Super. On
WFLA Facebook page and on the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page.
That's Saturday night at what time?
Saturday night at 6.
Got it.
And I need your help, Tom Benson, to come up with questions.
All right.
Although it's not, with everything going on, I just basically, the first question I'm probably going to ask them is if they support the bill for police reform right now that's being pushed by the Democrats. And if not, what kind of police reform would they support?
There's also a rumor going around that you bought a suit for this event.
It is fact. I did.
Wow.
Oh, there's a picture of me on my Facebook page and on the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page in a suit.
Ooh. I'm
like all grown up, Tom Benson.
Man.
So, yeah, check that out. You can like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page, find more information if you want to go. We will be practicing social distancing and all of that. So you can RSVP at ChristopherWrightForCongress.com. So the last show I did had to do with what I called the cold Civil War in this country.
Yes, I remember that, yeah.
And the cold Civil War is still going on in this country. Mm-hmm. And the woke mob out there has really got aggressive. Just in the past week, they've gotten aggressive. There's videos out there of them basically calling on white people to kneel and renounce their white privilege.
Not good.
They're pressuring businesses to do something for the Black Lives Matter movement. What else has happened? Drew Brees. They went after Drew Brees because he wanted to stand up for the flag and the national anthem. We're going to talk more about that in a moment.
That is all going to come up again this football season.
There's no doubt. Now, the only thing that's in favor of the NFL actually is they're not going to have fans in the stadium. So they'll be able to do this without any booze, I guess, because...
Yeah, but if it's on TV, it's going to raise a ruckus.
I guarantee it will be, though. It'll be on TV, and it will be promoted. Because the sports media, our pop culture in general, is on this bandwagon. They just are. The news media, the sports media, Hollywood, and sports players are all on board with this. And the pressure is just too high right now. And the NFL is going to have to cave in. Roger Goodell has already caved in on this. So they're going to kneel. They're all going to kneel. Goodell's probably going to kneel live on TV. It's going to be heavily promoted, and the NFL thinks that will they'll be baptized of their white privilege sins after that.
It's never enough.
And that is the point I want to make today, is that those out there who feel like that the woke mob, if you're happy that the woke mob is on your side right now, be careful, because they're going to turn on you eventually. The woke mob always seems to turn on people. In one sense, that's kind of the reason why I feel like our side could win the cold civil war in the long run, because the left eats their own all the time. They end up destroying each other all the time. The woke mob's going to come after you eventually. They will, because it's a purity test. We've seen this over and over again, but just in the past couple of weeks, we have seen this. One of the best examples has to do with the Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Fry. Now, we have audio here of this. I'm sure a lot of you have already seen this, but he showed up for one of the Black Lives Matter protests. And when you see the protesters, a lot of them are wearing masks, but on the masks, it says defund the police. Now, later on, we're going to talk about what exactly that means and how basically stupid it is, really. But defund the police. So he shows up in solidarity with the protesters. If anyone has caved into the protesters, it's been this mayor. He basically abandoned the police department headquarters in downtown Minneapolis and let the protesters and then some of the rioters burn it to the ground. He's been on their side the whole time, but it's not going to be good enough. Like I said, they might be on your side for a moment, but the woke mob will turn on you, and that's what they did. Here, you'll ask one of the protesters, ask the mayor if he's in favor of defunding the police in Minneapolis.
Jacob Fry, we have a yes or no question for you. Yes or no, will you commit to defunding Minneapolis Police Department?
I do not support the full abolition.
He does not support it.
All right, get the out of here. Go, Jacob. Go home.
So they're yelling, go home. Listen here in just a moment what they say. Shame. Shame. The woke Twitter mob out there starts yelling, shame, shame, shame. How Orwellian is that? That the mob is out there yelling shame. This is a guy that was mostly on their side. But they turned on him because he wasn't for completely defunding the Minneapolis Police Department, because I guess he's completely insane. But doesn't matter. They're going to turn on you. Another example of it from this week, J.K. Rowling.
Yes.
She's the author of the Harry Potter books. She's a liberal. She usually gets the support of these groups.
Mm-hmm.
But she came out this week.
She had a sin?
Oh, yes.
Oh.
And she refuses, by the way, to purify herself.
Oh, boy.
Mm-hmm.
No kneeling.
From her sin.
No kneeling.
It doesn't have to do with Black Lives Matter, but it has to do with transgender pronouns and all that. She said, people who menstruate, I'm sure there used to be a word for those people, she tweeted on Saturday. Someone help me out. Wumben, Wimpun, Wumud. Basically making the point that they're women. That men cannot menstruate. Now, of course, scientifically, this is right. This is correct. This shouldn't be controversial. Oh, but the woke Twitter mob turned on her. Oh, she has not stood up for the purity test. They used to be in favor of her. Even Daniel Radcliffe, who played Harry Potter in the movies, came out and basically denounced what she said and said, trans women are women, trans men are men, and all of this stuff.
You know, how come I never hear anyone asking a medical doctor how many genders there are?
You know the answer to that question.
Oh, okay.
Now, she did respond. She said, all I'm asking, all I want is for similar empathy, similar understanding to be extended to the many millions of women whose sole crime is wanting their concerns to be heard without receiving threats and abuse. Sounds I want trans women to be safe, she said. At the same time, I do not want to make natal girls and women less safe. I believe the majority of trans-identified people not only pose zero threat to others, but are vulnerable for all the reasons I've outlined. She says that she has trans friends. So she's even basically supportive of a lot of the transgender movement. But she wouldn't go as far to say they're the same as a trans woman. I don't know if I get this backwards. Is a trans woman a man who transitioned to a woman? Or is a transgender male someone who transitioned from a male to a female?
I think in this case it's a male who becomes a woman. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not the same as a woman. Of course it's not. But she's being blasted for it. Now, the good thing for her, she's not falling for it. She's not kowtowing to the mob. But those are two great examples of how the mob will turn on you eventually. There's another example that has not happened yet, but I think it's going to happen. It's a warning to a lot of those in the black community. To my black friends out there who are listening to the show right now, I have a warning for you if you support the woke mob right now. We'll get to that in a moment. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you miss any of the show, you can download the Beyond Reason podcast on iTunes. The voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason is back now.
Welcome back to the show here on News Radio WFLA Orlando. You can always listen to WFLA on 93.1 FM, 94.1 FM, and still on AM 540 in the iHeartRadio app. You can also catch the podcast, the Beyond Reason Radio podcast, on iHeartRadio.com and the iHeartRadio app. Just search for Beyond Reason Radio. So before the break, I had a warning to those in the black community. The woke mob, which is mostly white people, I think, actually, in a lot of the woke Twitter mobs. But they're on your side right now. But I have a feeling they're going to turn on you. Why is that? What do you mean? Because there are a lot of blacks in this country who are also very strong Christians. And I guarantee you they're going to come for the Christians next. Or eventually. I don't know if it'll be next. But eventually, they're going to come for Christians and Christian beliefs. We've seen some examples of this in our cold Civil War. That will grow in the coming years. And all of a sudden, a lot of those in the Black Lives Matter movement who loved that all these protesters and all these Twitter mobs were on their side will all of a sudden be considered part of the enemy because they're strong Christians. That is coming. I guarantee it. Now, there was an interesting piece in the National Review by Jim Garrity that I have to share with you. Talks a little bit about what I've been talking about. I call it the cold Civil War, which is going on in this country. Bud, on tomorrow's show, is going to call it the cultural Civil War. But there's a piece, and this piece is titled, Our Civil War of Stupidity. So I was like, okay, well, you've definitely got my attention. It says the loudest, most dominant voices in American political discourse often are the ones with the least thought through, least useful perspectives. Says there was a consensus that the police should not kill those in their custody. Then our warring factions of idiots went and ruined it. Talks about what happened to George Floyd. Says this angered many Americans, if not almost all Americans. Then some residents of Minneapolis chose to respond to Chauvin's actions by setting fire to the 3rd Precinct headquarters of the city police. The country had not yet finished discussing important questions, such as what is the appropriate consequence for these officers? And is this incident representative of systemic problems in police forces in Minneapolis or the rest of the country? But the arson in Minneapolis and provocations, I did not say that
Provocateurs.
Provocateurs such as firecrackers thrown at debates Are these protests mostly peaceful? Is looting justified? How much of what's happening on city streets is driven by Antifa? What counts as Antifa? He says here, our national discussion was quickly overrun by those who wanted to use the actions of Chauvin and his fellow officers to define all police across the country, and those who wanted to use the actions of the looters and rioters to define everyone participating in the protests. Anyone with eyes can see that not all police officers are Derek Chauvin, and not everyone who attended a protest, march, or demonstration were looting and committing acts of violence. But if some cops are bad, then police forces across the country might have to accept changes in procedure. And if some people who came out to protest exploited the moment as an opportunity to commit selfish crimes, the protesters will be forced to acknowledge that the police play a role in protecting the public and restoring order at times of unrest. Loud voices on each side had their narrative, and they weren't going to let a little inconvenience like the truth get in the way. And I read this, and I responded to what I've responded to before. The cold Civil War, a lot of this, it's not about ideas. It's not about policies. A lot of it has to do with the group you identify with. People in a lot of these debates that are putting these radical ideas out there, they're not thinking about the ideas they're pushing. They just want to identify with a certain group to make themselves feel better. Because that's how they get their purpose. I'm with this group now. This is why the mob mentality is so big in our culture right now. This is why the woke Twitter mob has gotten so much power and so many followers. Because right now, too many people, instead of thinking about the truth, like he says, or instead of thinking like an individual, or instead of thinking about policies and actions, they're thinking about, well, what does my mob think? What does my group think? Because I have to fall in line with them because then they'll like me. And I'll feel better. I'll be able to virtue signal. And it's annoying. Don't follow the crowd. Don't follow the mob. One, because they're going to turn on you. And two, they're not interested in ideas and the truth. It's not going to change anything. It's just going to divide us more.
Sort of like a bunch of sheep going off the cliff, huh?
Yes. Well, yeah, exactly. Sheep. By the way, there are some of those on Trump's side as well, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you heart Beyond Reason Radio, listen to the Beyond Reason Radio podcast on iHeartRadio. Just download the iHeartRadio app and search Beyond Reason Radio. This is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. Beyond Reason Radio continues now.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. We have a lot of different stuff to get to, so just listen up. And if you miss part of the show because you're just in your car and you only listen to a few minutes of it, there's this thing now. It's this great new invention. It's called the internet.
Oh.
Yeah. And then there's this other thing that everyone has now. It's called a smartphone. Uh-huh. And you can just download the iHeartRadio app and just listen to the podcast.
Holy cow.
I know, fancy schmancy. Listen for Beyond. Subscribe to the podcast and share with your friends and all that. You can listen to every minute of me on every episode. So you should probably do that. So in a moment, I have to talk about the other mob, the Trump mob. Uh-huh. That one person from that mob went after me today on Twitter.
Really?
Uh-huh. So, I mean, like I said, they'll turn on you. Mobs turn on you. But first, I wanted to play the voice of reason of the day. We were talking earlier about Drew Brees, and he had the audacity to stand up for the American flag. I know. It's controversial now, apparently. Burgess Owen, who is black, former NFL player himself. He's running for Congress.
He's a millionaire, too.
Yeah, he's got a couple of books out. He was on Tucker Carlson after the whole Drew Brees thing broke. Now, Drew Brees, of course, as we talked about, apologized.
Twice, and then his wife apologized for it. So I don't know if he has been purified of all his white privilege sins. He's got to kneel in the locker room.
He'll kneel in the locker room. He'll kneel on the field.
Well,
it's happening. Nope. It's going to happen. So Burgess Owens was on Tucker, and he was asked about the whole Drew Brees situation. And let's say he does not mince words. Here is what he said.
I'm disappointed, of course, that he retracted that. But at the same time, every one of us have a certain part to play. And Drew's part right now is to make sure he does what he can to unify that part of the country. Those who understand who he is, they know he's not a racist. And at the same time, we have people like myself. I will call these people out for they are. They're bullies, they're cowards, they're Marxists, period. And I'm one of those guys that will never, ever acquiesce or apologize for pride in my country. And I'll say another thing. I will always say all lives matter. I don't care what the bullies say. And what we have to understand is that together, between the messages of those who truly do what they can to unify in a way that's more soft, and those of us who tell the truth, we'll win our country back. One thing for sure, we need to understand that we're under attack, and it's the evil of trying to destroy our middle class.
So there you go. He wishes Drew Brees to not apologize. But wait until you hear this next cut from him, because he's right on point with all of this. I just like that he kind of says it straight, doesn't mince words. He says we're under attack. He says those groups are destroying the black community. They're destroying the middle class. But he goes further. Here it is.
These guys are making $50 million a year, and they cannot stand and tell young people, this is how I did it. I was disciplined. I worked hard. I respected people. And I paid the price. Instead, they tell other people, you can't do it like I did because white people are not going to let you get it done. These are Marxists. They're enemies to our nation. And particularly those black leaders are enemies to my race. And it's time for us to stand up against these guys and say, we're not going to be used anymore by you people.
Well, exactly.
We're going to stand up. We're going to tell these people what it really is and get our country back and our young people to believe in our country.
If they can make you disavow your country, will they make you denounce your spouse, your parents, your children next? Probably. I'm serious. Don't go along with it.
Tucker's right there at the end. But Mr. Owens is right as well. Imagine if the black leaders out there like Al Sharpton, instead of trying to claim that if you're black in this country, you're a victim, imagine if they were like Burgess Owens and said, encourage them to accomplish your dreams in this country, because right now you have amazing opportunities in this country if you work hard, if you do the right things, if you make good decisions.
They won't do that. It won't have a positive impact on Sharpton's pocketbook.
Exactly. Why can't they be inspiring instead of claiming that everyone's a victim? There was a time in this country where blacks were definitely victimized, but we were entering a time where more and more blacks were entering the middle class. I mean, they made a TV show called Blackish. The whole concept of that show is that a black family was entering the middle class and the struggles they faced. They were making other shows similar because it's happening. We saw urban renewal across this country. And another story about how a lot of the urban renewal, a lot of the cities, people are going to leave them now because of all of this. We were finally cleaning up the inner cities, which of course helps the black community. And all that might be destroyed now. Why can't we be encouraged to believe in America and believe you have opportunities? So he was right on there. Now, let's get back to the other mob, the Twitter mob, the Trump Twitter mob. Because they'll turn on you, too, if you ever criticize Trump. I voted for Trump. Oh, but I don't always like what he did. So, I mean, somebody tweeted to me today. She listens to the morning show. Mm-hmm. She always tweets against me because anytime I criticize Trump. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, when I say something positive about Trump, I don't hear from her. But I say something negative, and she tweeted, she called me a rat with a picture of a rat. Ooh, R-A-T. You know what that is?
Yes.
Republican against Trump.
Oh, boy.
That's what rat is.
That's a new one.
And it's always this stuff. You don't believe in our president. So what was my great criticism of Trump? That maybe he doesn't think before he tweets. That maybe he should lay off some of the Twitter nonsense. That's my criticism.
You and Condoleezza Rice are in the same pew.
Ooh, we're going to get to that cut in a moment because you're right. But this is what Trump said that got criticism. And I mean, why did Trump tweet this? Why? And it's not like I'm the only conservative saying this. But Trump tweeted this out. He said, Buffalo protester shoved by police could be an Antifa provocateur. Okay, maybe he is. I don't know. What does that have to do with the fact that he was pushed and shoved to the ground so hard his head was bleeding and he was knocked out? He wasn't doing anything violent at the time. It said 75-year-old Martin Gugino was pushed away after appearing to scan police communications in order to black out their equipment. Now, he had a cell phone in his hand, and people are speculating he was waving the cell phone to block police communications or something. I'm not even sure that's how that works. But it would just been a couple of officers in the front he was doing that to. It says, he tweeted out the One American News Network, which I guess someone there floated this out there. He says, I watched the video. He fell harder than he was pushed. Was aiming scanner. Could be a setup? Now, are you saying that him falling to the ground and busting his head and having to go to the hospital because he was knocked out and bleeding was a setup? Really? Why would you tweet this? Why? This doesn't help the situation. You're the president. So that was my criticism, and that was Bud's criticism and Alan's criticism this morning. And, of course, people in the Trump mob now, you have to have blind loyalty to everything Trump says. Otherwise, you're a rat. You're a Republican against Trump. Now, I voted for Trump. I defended him against impeachment. I've defended him against the media. I've done lots of things, but it's not good enough because the mob doesn't care. The mob doesn't care about individual thought. You must fall blindly in line or they will turn on you and yell, shame. And they never debate you on the merits. It's just yelling at you. So this is something that kind of goes on both sides. I just wanted to point that out. Don't fall for the mob on either side. Now, one person who pointed this out was Condoleezza Rice, worked for the Bush administration, former Secretary of State, a black woman, of course. She's the ancestors of slaves and slave owners, which is very interesting. One side of her family, ancestors of slaves, the other side, ancestors of slave owners. So that, interesting dynamic there. But she was asked about Trump's leadership and tweeting, and she made some good points. I thought she was a pretty good voice of reason. Here's what she said.
Well, no, the president, obviously the shooting and looting, he said that he didn't know that historical context. And so I would say think about the historical context before you say something, because it is a deep wound. And the presidency is special in that regard. People look to the Oval Office, as we've looked to the Oval Office throughout our history, for messages, for signals. And as I said, the president has used some language that I really very, very much admire, like the resilience of the American people. Just be careful about those messages. I'm not advising the president, but if I were, I would say let's put tweeting aside for a little bit and talk to us, have a conversation with us. And I think we need that, and I think he can do it.
So there you go. I don't think he can do it, by the way. She's much more optimistic than I am. I don't think Trump can change. He will not change when it comes to his Twitter. He will not change when it comes to his rants. He will not change when it comes to not thinking before he speaks. It's just who he is. Mm-hmm. It's benefited him most of his life. He became rich off of it. He doesn't feel like he needs to change right now.
Yeah. Come with him. Come at him with a hammer. He'll come back with you with a sledgehammer.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I just don't think it's helpful when there's really not much evidence out there to suggest that this guy was trying to set up officers to push him down so he'd have to go to the hospital. Like, what? Maybe he is an Antifa provocateur. Maybe he is a protester. He obviously is a protester. Maybe he doesn't like police. That's irrelevant to the situation. Okay, it's irrelevant. So there you go. And I believe I do want to say this. The officers that did push the guy, this is the video that went viral of a 75-year-old man where officers pushed him and he fell to the ground. I don't think the officers meant to push him that hard. I will say that. I think he was in a weird angle and he tripped and fell and hit his head. And obviously, and people were saying the officers didn't care. That's not true, actually. One of the officers knelt down to try to help him. The other officer pulled that guy up, and the reason why he did that, which isn't said, is he wanted to call a medic. He called one of the National Guard medics to come over and look at the guy on his radio. That's why he pulled the guy up. That part isn't reported. So I'm not saying the officers are just downright evil in this situation, but this stuff doesn't help from Trump. He's the president. Now, Condoleezza Rice, speaking of her, I just wanted to play this other cut because I just really liked it in general. She was asked about other countries around the world protesting what's going on in America in terms of police brutality and racism and all that stuff. Her response to this is excellent. I just love it, so I thought I would play for it. Here it is.
I would say to those, particularly in places like China and Russia and Iran, who may want to use this for propaganda, let's not be absurd. This is not Tiananmen Square, where you mowed down people who disagreed with the government. This is not the invasion of Crimea, where you took land from your neighbor. This is not the Green Revolution in Iran, where you killed people wantonly because they wouldn't agree with the theocratic government. And I would even say to our friends abroad in places like Europe, where I'm seeing demonstrations in support of what is happening here, thank you for your support, but please look in the mirror. Please ask yourself, in countries in Europe and countries all across the world, what are you doing about racial and ethnic inequality in your own circumstances? America has gotten better because we have been willing to confront our problems. And we're going to confront our problems again. We're confronting them now, and I think we will move forward this time. But I really don't need to be lectured by Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping about peaceful protest when they have themselves used their own force just because people wanted to criticize the government. That is not what is happening here.
This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Download the iHeart Radio app and catch the Beyond Reason Radio podcast. The conscience in your ear telling you the difference between right and wrong. Yaffee is back on the air.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio. Well, the woke Twitter mob, there's another casualty of the woke Twitter mob, and it's on the HBO Max streaming network. Tom Benson reminded me of this during the break. Tell us about it.
Well, they HBO Max, or is it HBO Plus, whatever.
It's Max, yeah.
Oh, Max, okay. They've taken off Gone with the Wind as one of those movies that you could view on the streaming service. And, of course, Gone with the Wind is one of the all-time classics.
Of course.
Going back to 1939. And a lot of people don't realize that the maid in the movie, Hattie McDaniel, who was born on this date in 1895, as a matter of fact, in her role in that movie was the first black American to win an Academy Award.
Yep. And now that's her accomplishment is now gone.
Right.
It's erased.
It's that important. Yes.
So you have the first ever black person to win an Academy Award. She's a black woman years ago, accomplishes. She even said at the time this was a big accomplishment for her race. That's now erased. We have to erase history and context and everything else. I saw another headline that said this is the new cultural revolution, talking about what happened in China during that cultural revolution when mobs of people tried to tear down everything to do with ancient China's rituals or Confucianism or anything like that. And we have a similar situation here in America where you're seeing it with Christopher Columbus statues. Now, the goal, of course, is to tear everything down so they can rebuild it in some kind of socialist utopian image, which, of course, is never going to actually come to pass. But it looks like, are you trying to find the audio of her? So we might play that a little bit from her acceptance speech back then. But I did want to point out another thing. There's a lot of talk about defunding the police. or abolishing the police. And a lot of people are giving the example of what happened in Camden, New Jersey, where they disbanded the Camden, New Jersey Police Department. And they're saying, see, you can defund the police, you can get rid of the police, and crime went down there and everything is great there. Except that's not exactly what happened. They did not just defund and disband the police department. It was all about reform. It wasn't abolishing police or getting rid of police. It was reforming policing in that area. And what they did is they basically transferred policing from the city to the county and actually added the number of police in the county. So there was corruption in the police force in Camden. A lot of it had to do with the union, the power of the unions. And they disbanded that, but they didn't get rid of policing. They just reformed it. It's completely different. Now, Tom, did you find
yes,
the audio?
Gone with the Wind came out in 1939. Mm-hmm. She won her Academy Award a year later in 1940, and I think we have a clip of her acceptance speech.
Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science, fellow members of the motion picture industry, and honored guests. This is one of the happiest moments of my life, and I want to thank each one of you who had a part in selecting me for one of the awards. For your kindness, it has made me feel very, very humble, and I shall always hold it as a beacon for anything that I may be able to do in the future. I sincerely hope I shall always be a credit to my race and to the motion picture industry. My heart is too full to tell you just how I feel, and may I say thank you.
And that's it.
Yeah.
She was also a singer, by the way, before she got into movies.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, on the radio, yeah. Yeah.
And now they're just trying to erase her history.
Either that or they're not aware or they don't care.
I don't think it's just caving. It's like I said, it's just caving to the mob. That's all it is. Now, I guess I did hear somewhere they might bring it back and have like a disclaimer or something. Then, of course, there's what happened with Disney. No, it's not Disney. It's a Warner. Whoever's going to stream the Looney Tunes shows.
And Elmer Fudd has no gun rifle now.
Elmer Fudd or Yosemite Sam won't have guns, which is insane.
But they still have cannons.
I know. And violence and other weapons. It's
no
stupid.
Rifles.
But think about this. Think about how many millions of kids over the years have watched those cartoons and never actually thought about getting a real gun and shooting people or animals, for that matter. So I'm supposed to believe we need to get rid of these cartoons because it could promote violence? When there's absolutely no evidence that it ever really has promoted violence in the past enough to where millions of kids across the world wanted to take guns and kill people and animals? Like, come on. It's just stupid. And we all know it's stupid. Don't follow the crowd. Don't fall with the mob. I really appreciate you listening to the show. Don't forget, I will be moderating the Republican primary debate this Saturday in Kissimmee. You can RSVP at ChristopherWrightForCongress.com or like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page. There's info there as well. And, well, I'll be back tomorrow. Catch you then.